Hey, everybody, this is Nathaniel Provencio, and as always, my good friend, Dr. Worster, and we've got a fantastic thought leader on the Community Connection from Hudson, living in Hudson, New York. Stephen Wilson, welcome to the show, author and thought leader. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Hey, it's great to be with both of you. And I love the idea that we will be sparring about ideas, not necessarily always agreeing. So I'm excited to be with you guys.
Well, it's one of those things where I've noticed, Dr. Worst, you might have noticed this. A lot of educators speak in echo chambers. We get in these camps, right? And we get very passionate about these camps, and sometimes we get so myopic with one perspective and viewpoint, we fail to learn. And if we're not learning, then we're not growing, we're not evolving. So I mean, so I
Kind of like
think
going to the gym, right? It's
it's
going to
like
the gym. If you,
it's
if you
going to the
don't
gym.
work different groups of muscles, you will never get better or bigger or faster or whatever the thing is. So same
Let
Absolutely.
me
thing,
just
same thing
say
with
the most boring kind of interview to do is the one where the host has already decided everything, thinks he agrees with you without even knowing what you actually believe.
Oh,
yeah.
forget that. Yeah, that's what
So
all the other
this
podcasts do, not the
it
community
really is,
connection.
I have to tell you. And rarely have they actually read what you, I mean, yeah, read what you've written. So this is wonderful.
Cover to
So
cover, Stephen.
I love it. I love it. Stephen, okay, so we're familiar with you. Our viewers and our listeners might not be familiar with you. We're a sucker for an origin story. Tell us about baby Stephen and how baby Stephen grew up, and now Stephen's with us right now. So as quick as you can, just give us the origin
I'll
story.
give you the super fast version. I grew up in a suburb outside of Boston, Concord, Mass.
That's where I was
I
born.
went to
Connection.
a suburban school system that was considered, really pretty good. But looking back, it was the 1970s. Remember the book, The Shopping Mall High School? I think that really captured the period where they were tracks. Not a lot was asked of you. There were no education standards set by the state. I mean, believe it or not, in Massachusetts, the only requirements of high schools, get this, were that they be 4 years of physical education and 1 year of American history.
Wow.
Everything else was up for grabs. So if as a student you didn't want to do much work, you really didn't have to.
Mm.
And so I think that was very much a school of its time. But I was the child of academics. I knew that I didn't want to become a scientist like the rest of my family. And I actually went into business for the first 10 years of my life. And then I just got very excited about education policy. And so for the last, this is going to date me, 40 years of my career, this is what I've been doing, mainly actually not as a researcher or writer, but as a practitioner. And my most recent project was something called Ascend Learning, which was is a charter school network in Brooklyn, in some of the most challenged parts of the city. And that was just the thrill of a lifetime. It was really a fantastic project. I just absolutely loved it.
Outstanding.
And Stephen, what have you been doing since then?
Since then, I've been mainly researching and writing, and my most recent project is, I think, what brings me to you, which is a new book which came out in March, and I'm really excited to have completed that. It's called The Lost Decade: Returning to the Fight for Better Schools in America, and it's really about where we are in this moment of school reform and how we can restore, I think, the drive for radical change in education.
Yeah.
So here's the book right there.
There's the book.
Very interesting, very comprehensive read. One of the things I think that struck me was you mentioned Massachusetts. Like I said, I was born in Concord, so we got that great connection there.
Oh, terrific.
Can you talk to us? You mentioned schools and what they were like in the 70s in Massachusetts. I keep hearing, Nathaniel, I'm sure you hear too, about how for a while Massachusetts was kind of the envy of the nation.
Sure.
Stephen, what created that Massachusetts miracle?
Oh, I love talking about this because I think it's enormously interesting. So in the very early 90s, there was a business group called the Massachusetts Business Alliance for Education, which really drove this effort at the beginning. And it put out a white paper. So this part is not unusual, right? But it said rather definitively that the schools were failing the Commonwealth school children, and that we were in crisis and we had to do something. And it created a drive for legislation to address that. So in the blueprint, which had the rather banal name of Every Child a Winner, it proposed what that would look like. And it would have a combination of a lot more money, so that was a very important part of it, and a lot more equity in how the money was distributed across school districts. We could talk more about that. But also really ambitious academic standards for what children would learn in every grade, new accountabilities, including that to graduate, to get a diploma, you would have to pass the 10th grade exam, and much more, including a beachhead of charter schools. So just a very small number, only 25 were allowed under the original law. But the idea was to infuse a dollop of healthy competition and press for excellence into the system. Turned out to be a winning formula. It took a while, right? First, all the standards had to be drafted and fought over and all of that. But eventually, the children started to rise. And for now, roughly 2 decades, Massachusetts has been at the top of the 50 states in student achievement. So there's a lot to be learned from that success. And it was thrilling to be on Governor Wells' team at the time trying to put it together.
All right, so I got some questions, Stephen. I got some questions, man. I need you to help me out with that. So, was it because of those charter schools specifically that Massachusetts has its miracle, or was it because of, like, I'm a public school principal, I'm a public school superintendent, I'm like, hey, listen, we've got a little bit of competition, we need to get our act together. What are they doing, and what can we replicate? Because success breeds success. How did that rising tide lift all those boats, so to speak?
Yeah, I think Nathaniel, it's always hard to disentangle the components of success, and of course, everyone wants to claim to be its author. But I would say, and this may surprise you, charters were not a very large part of that because the number of them was small.
Mm-hmm.
The academic standards, but not just the standards, the new licensing requirements for teachers were a very important part. To become a teacher in Massachusetts, you had to pass a test in 2 parts that was developed by the state. It wasn't at the low bar of the Praxis test, for example. It had much higher expectations, including for subject matter knowledge. You had to really know your content to teach in Massachusetts. And as a result of that, all of the ed schools wanted to be able to show that if you went to their school of education, you would succeed in passing that test. Because of course, your own personal resources were at stake to get this degree. You wanted to be damn sure that it would end up with you landing a job.
Absolutely.
So there was the whole ecology of schooling in Massachusetts started to change because of all of these different components of the reform. But it's extremely important to mention that the academic standards themselves were a huge part. These were not your usual platitudinous, vague, insipid standards. These were academically ambitious, exciting standards. I mentioned a few of them in the book. So an example would be in early grades, you'd be learning about myths, and you would read about what are the components of myths, and students would then write their own myths, borrowing from the components of mythology. That would be a perfect example of something that was intellectually really challenging, fun for kids, and created a very high bar. And it turned out, guess what? That kids could rise to this challenge. And a very telling moment, I tell this story in the book, is when the first practice test for the 10th grade, on which graduation would be dependent, was given. And by practice, I mean it had no stakes.
Right.
Well, as many feared, most 10th graders failed it. But when the real test clicked in 2 years later, children rose to the standard and almost 80, 90%
Oh, wow.
passed. So I think this is a story about how America's expectations for what students can know and do is consistently horribly less than what kids are actually capable of.
Stephen, if the schools in Mass were successful, how did charter schools change that landscape, or why were they needed?
Yeah, I think the role of charters in Massachusetts was to show what was possible in urban education. Of course, charters were also granted in some suburban settings, but most of those were pretty awful. The ones that really were good were in Boston, the largest city, of course, and there was a whole cadre of charters that had been given the pejorative name of no excuses, right? But that turned out to be just sensationally successful. I mean, they just left the Boston Public Schools in the dust. And they did this through a very simple combination of things. But the enabling idea behind all of them was indeed this idea of no excuses, which in the public mind has been confused with the idea that we're just going to wail on kids and the discipline's going to be horrible and there are going to be no excuses made for any kids not having their shoelaces tied and all that. It had nothing to do with that. It was actually about adults
Yes.
was saying that the professional community in the school was going to stop invoking this litany of excuses. Oh, we don't have enough money. Oh, the kids come from terrible
Yeah.
families. Oh, there's too much racism, et cetera, et cetera. Not that all those things are not real, but within these four walls, they said, we have what it takes to have every kid succeed at a high level. And when you create that kind of culture in an organization, it's extraordinary what happens.
Stephen, I gotta double down on that because I believe that 1000%. And actually, there's research, clear research and meta-analysis that supports that. Teacher estimates of student learning has an effect size.
Yeah.
Collective teacher efficacy is still 1.5, I don't know, 1.57 effect size, which is like a tremendous. So mindset matters. And I think, Stephen, you're right. And Eric, there's two types of schools. There's either an all school or an if school. And Stephen, you just talked about, and this is whether you're public, charter, magnet, whatever. If you're an all school, it's no excuses. The adults in the building are going to roll up their sleeves, and we're going to do everything we can to help every single kid, all of our students, learn at high levels. And even if we don't get there, our expectations are high. They may fall a little bit, but we have an equitable excellence framework for everyone. And then there's the culture of if, which is promulgated so much in our schools. Little Stephen can learn if he had
Yes,
dad at home.
very well
Little
put.
little Worcester could learn if he wasn't from Concord, Mass. Little Nathaniel could learn if he wasn't Hispanic. If, and if abdicates our professionalism,
Responsibility. Yep.
right?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think of it as the idea that we're going to do whatever it takes as a community to succeed with every child. And we're going to start with that, and we're going to stop the excuse making. But it's the
Yeah,
same idea.
absolutely,
And it's
absolutely.
incredibly powerful, and it's exhilarating for the people who are actually doing the work. I think that's also neglected. It's not burdensome, it's exhilarating because you're working in a community of equally committed professionals who are trying to reach the moon and believe that it can be done, and then they get there.
And one more point on this, as a father, like I always, the most important hat that I ever wear is the hat of dad, hat of a daddy. And if I were tethered to a community school that was full of excuses, full of ifs, and I was not getting the absolute best education for my son and my daughter, and I had a choice that
Mhm.
there was a school right across the street that has an all culture, whether that's a charter school, whatever, and I know it, and they've got the receipts to prove it, and this school knows that, but they're not changing their culture. They're not doing that because maybe they felt like they just don't have to anymore. Well, maybe losing a couple of customers, losing a couple of family members, it might be what it takes to change that trajectory because I want the best for my kids. And
And there is evidence of that. There is a number of studies that have looked at, and now we're getting into
yeah,
more controversial ground, right? But I think that's okay. Which looked at the proximity of an urban school to a new charter, and a new charter does not depress achievement in the surrounding traditional public school. It enhances it,
mm,
and presumably the mechanism is what you're describing. So the common wisdom of charter school opponents would be to say that that school, the new school, is simply going to pull in all the motivated parents. It's going to
mm,
strip financial resources from the district school. In fact, that's not the case, because if it's pulling in only the best schools, you'd expect achievement to fall in the traditional public school, but in fact, it goes up.
oh,
If
that's
it's pulling
fascinating.
away resources per student in the traditional school, that would decline, but in fact, resources increase. So I think what you're absolutely onto something. There is it's just human nature. Uh, there is a press for improvement that comes about when someone else is doing it too. You
Yeah.
become curious about what they're doing. It's a drive to get better. It's the best of human nature, not the worst. And why should we take the most important sector of American activity, which is the education of our youth, and isolate it, deprive it from that press for improvement? I think that's a bad policy choice.
Hmm.
There are a lot of schools that, because there is no consequence for whether they do a good job or a bad job, are deeply mediocre institutions that reliably fail their kids year after year after year. That's
Hmm.
unconscionable. We need to stop doing that.
Yeah.
Stephen, let me ask you, as the founder of a school network, what kinds of things were critically important to you to have in place in your schools, besides the no excuses? What else for your students to succeed?
Well, I think they were many. I mean, I would just begin with the fact that you would recruit a faculty of ambitious, driven people that wanted to do this work. That's the most important. The leader, the principal is, of course, here I am talking to two principals, enormously important. That fearless leader who's willing to say audacious things, who's willing to set that bar in a very unembarrassed way and say, guess what, guys, we're going to meet it. And in every interaction is modeling those beliefs and that expectations, whether it's in a conversation with kids or families or teachers. I think that at a more technical level, obviously the quality of the curriculum is immensely important. An abundance of professional learning time for teachers to work together turns out to be incredibly important. In our schools at Ascend, one of the biggest drivers of success was when we started opening up time in the teacher's professional day to do two activities with their grade team
Mm.
members. One was student work analysis, to actually look at what kids were producing and what it told them about their teaching. What were the observable failure points? What were the misunderstandings? And the second one was what we called intellectual prep, really going deep into that poem together that they were about to teach the next day, figuring out that roadmap of questions that they would ask the kids that wouldn't give away the meaning of the poem, but would help them to move in that direction. That's a really difficult art, but when teachers do that together, it's really powerful. So I mean, I could go on, but those were
No, no,
Nathaniel, you like that?
oh, I love it. I got the tingles, Stephen. I got the tingles, right? But
me
I'm
too.
gonna I'm gonna put a finer point on that. It doesn't. I have this point. I have this thing that I've been saying that excellence gets lost in the averages,
Mhm.
and and there is, look, maybe deserved, maybe not. Maybe it's just kind of like the zeitgeist right now that there is so much conversation that is somewhat anti-public school, right?
Mhm.
Depends on whatever AI feed that you're going through. I am public school. I think the community school should be the greatest choice for our kids. But what I got the tingles though is what you just said speaks to collective teacher efficacy and speaks to a culture of professional learning communities
Mhm.
and job embedded collaborative time where the teacher team is carefully examining those standards, right? Those priority standards, those mastery standards, not the 5,722 standards, right? But like a
Mhm.
handful of those essential standards. And they're going deep with it, unpacking it, making sure that they're having clarity around their practice. They're creating strong assessments and measures to be able to backwards design, to be able to get evidence of their impact. They're analyzing the effectiveness of their instructional strategies. They're differentiating their instruction within the teams and their goal setting. And they're doing that. They have these habits, because that's what you were just talking about, these
Mhm.
habits of
Really
professionalism,
protocols even, I would say.
protocols, collective habits, and like this balance between alignment and autonomy, which I think is like the paradox of professionalism.
Mhm.
But
That's right.
but there are public schools doing the exact thing and getting tremendous results, regardless of their population of who they just have. And those schools are not talked about enough. And that's one of the things that bothers me is that there's not a brand ambassador, right, for some of these public schools that are these positive deviants that are doing exactly what you were talking about. And I think that we need to shine a light on every school that's doing
Mhm.
this type of
Yes.
work, right?
Yep. And that's what I think
Absolutely.
schools can learn, right? If there is a charter network or even a private school network where they're doing phenomenal things, I would love for our public schools to learn from that experience. Stevenson, the thing that I talk about a lot, you mentioned a strong vision for the school
Mhm.
and for the school network, and having everyone who comes on board know these are our expectations. This is how we run things. So I think those are also really key features of student success is when you have people coming in and there's a clear vision from the leader of the expectations. And if you want to join our crew, it's going to be hard work. It's going to be tough. We'll have no excuses, but here's what it is. And after all that work you put in, you will see phenomenal results come from it. I think it's powerful.
Yes, and I would like to say that I think that in some settings, and perhaps not in the districts where you have led, but particularly in northeastern highly unionized districts, and I believe in unions, and I think America should have a lot more a lot more unions and a lot more participation in unions. But in large urban school systems, of course, the problem is that your faculty is inherently fragile because of phenomena like seniority-based bumping, the inability to let go of chronically low performers. It's very hard to create the culture of excellence that we all are agreeing to is essential if you, as a leader, have little to no control over who your talent in the building is. And
That's
that
a good point.
seems to be a tremendous moral wrong to me. Because if we hobble our public schools from the start with those constraints, what we're really saying is this is not an education system, this is an employment system. And that's got to stop.
I agree 1000%. And it's always interesting, Stephen, is like, who would you want your child's class? Would you put your child in that classroom? You know, and if we wouldn't put our own children in the classroom, those classrooms, then like, then what are we doing? And like, and look, I get it. Like Eric and I, we had a podcast where like every school has like 4 different types of teachers, you know, ish. Your pioneers, which are your hungry people, they come in, they're new, they're ready to roll, they're pioneers. Then you got your trailblazers. Those are people that are just like just outstanding. That's your school leaders, you know, all your team leaders just crushing it. But then you got some of those settlers, right, Stephen, who've been there for a long time and they're settled, they're a little cynical, a little skeptical, but they're just kind of they got the t-shirt that says been there, done that, and you can't make me change. And then you got some of those downright outlaws that are I don't even know why they're there, you know, and someone's
I remember Nathaniel talking to the head of personnel of Boston Public Schools many, many years ago. So this is not a new phenomenon.
yeah,
I think in those days it was actually called personnel, not HR. That tells you how long ago it was. And
sure.
he said very flatly, we have what we call the turkey teacher list, which sounds deeply disrespectful, but in fact, I think it would be much more respectful to stop this practice, which was a long list of teachers that everybody knew was in one of your last categories, and that they were routinely circulated across the schools with an eye to no one school being excessively burdened. And a principal who was ambitious and trying to make something happen at school told me a story about how one day he got a call from the personnel department who said, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that that position that you've been longing for a long time, that additional teacher in kindergarten, has been approved. The bad news is it's going to be filled by the person that you took 3 years to get rid of.
Yeah. Yeah. And where do those and listen, and where do those people go? They don't go to the middle class upper schools. They go to the lowest performing schools because then they can hide. And I
Yes,
hate
and
and I
that, of
hate
course, is another problem, which is that
exactly.
the least experienced teachers are grouped at the highest needs schools. That is, we talk about that term structural racism,
Mm,
and sometimes it's just a kind of inert expression because it just refers to the disparity itself without actually referring to a specific policy that is racist. But
mm,
I would argue that assigning the least experienced and weakest teachers by policy, by design, explicitly
mm,
to the highest poverty schools in a district is an example of structural racism or tenure
mm.
or seniority-based bumping. These are examples of egregious practices that harm kids, and they
Yeah.
harm the most who? Black and brown kids.
Yeah. 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 I agree. And it's not um it's not a topic that people want to talk about, right?
No, we're in fact utterly silent on it. It's a kind of not knowing, I describe it as. Urban leaders all know that this is wrong. They
Mm,
all know that the fact that 12th grade Black and brown students read and do math at the level of a white eighth grader
mm.
is a moral obscenity, but they're not willing to actually do anything about it.
Yeah.
So they stay silent.
Yeah. It's a shit show. It's a shit
It
show.
is.
Yeah.
But
Dr.
I
Worcester?
want to go back to your more positive point. Sorry, we've gone into a dark
I don't know.
corner.
We can stay. We can dwell in the basement. I love it. Let's do it.
But no, but you're absolutely right to move to a more cheerful tone. That there are, of course, schools across sectors that are killing it and have great results. And
Right.
we should hear those stories more often, and we don't. And we often, it's true that high-performing charters probably get excess airtime in that regard, and we should hear much more about fantastic urban district schools that are doing right by their kids. And I think we would find, to your point, that they are doing a lot of the same things.
Mm.
Stephen, we've been through somewhat of an interesting evolution, I think, in education in the past 10 years. I think things are still shifting and evolving. You mentioned something earlier that I guess kind of stuck out to me when you mentioned that the schools in Boston were doing, the charter schools were doing better than other urban schools, right? The charters in Boston are doing better than the urban schools in Boston. I guess the key word there is better, and I think that's been a definitional question that's
Mhm.
been bantered around in the past in this past decade of what does better mean. And I think generally, what I would consider better would be great student outcomes, students being on grade level, passing their grade level exams, graduating on time, being successful in their community. Those would be the things that I would consider to be really important measures of success. However, I think there has been in the last 10 years some shift on about what that word better means.
Mhm.
Would you agree with that?
I think there's been a lot of, yes, there's been a lot of discussion about it. I'm very dismayed by most of that discussion because I think that it is simply a resurgence, a kind of revanchism of the anti-intellectual history of American education, which has been hostile to academic achievement really from its beginning, and especially hostile to intellectual joy and accomplishment. And I think that this is in a way, and I don't think this is how it's intended, but I think it's a return to that. It's a way of clouding the glass so we can't see what's really going on by saying, oh, it's not just, test scores are bad or they're just one way of measuring. We really should be thinking about 15 different things. Any organization that thinks about 15 different things isn't thinking about anything at all.
Exactly.
And I think it also reflects another confusion. An educated child is going to feel great about himself or herself. It's not the other way around. We
Right.
don't build self-esteem so that students can succeed. The evidence of causality in that direction is very, very weak, and there have been major natural experiments to try to prove it unsuccessfully. But what is very clear is the other direction. If kids have a daily, successful, little tiny experience of academic success in every period, if instruction is well designed enough, that in every period, children at every level of academic uh, competence experience a gain. They
Hmm.
feel great. Momentum builds. They feel that they are good students. They feel that they have something to give to the world and they're on path to being able to do so. So we need to keep our eye on the ball. Well-designed tests measure what really matters. And we have to be very careful that in these discussions, I think, Eric, that you're bringing up of multiple measures of success, we don't slip into a kind of condescension where we say we're empowering kids when we're not educating them. There's
Mhm.
no power in ignorance. All the people that are forwarding these ideas are themselves highly educated adults who
Mhm.
had the great fortune of having a strong academic education, going to a strong college or university. But too often they're the ones that are saying that academics don't really matter. And I find
Hmm.
that horrifying.
Hmm.
I
It's a
appreciate
double
reading
standard.
your five evasions, and you just referenced one of them,
Yes,
right?
that's what I'm referring to.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate that part of what comes first, actual accomplishment or self-esteem. And oftentimes I think some can focus more on that self-esteem part, like you just said, without focusing, and you had some great lines about that in the book, before focusing on what you actually gain self-esteem from, and that's by knowledge and a sense of accomplishment and a sense of
And I
achievement.
really emphasize, Eric, these little gains every period. If there can be just an aha moment where, you learn something that period about fractions, you realize that ratios and fractions are really the same thing. Bingo, wow, I get it. That makes you feel good.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
found something. And we just need a lot of those moments reliably. And we know how to make those things happen reliably.
Stephen, and Eric, can you just lean into those big five? Because I think that would be great to just kind of
Yeah.
like go through. I know we've touched on a little bit, but Stephen, can you go through those five for our
Yeah,
listeners?
I don't, maybe not all of them because I'm talking too much and I feel bad about
Oh,
that.
it's all right. It's okay.
But one of them is the therapeutic evasion, which we've been touching on, which is inviting teachers to function as therapists and not as teachers. And I am very worried about that. And there's been a real growth of that recently.
Mm,
No, educators are not trained therapists. We don't need, as one district once told me, to have more counselors on hand while reading a book where the character's mother dies. Like,
mm,
death happens.
mm,
Kids can deal with it.
mm,
So this culture of fragility is actually making things worse. We're creating a generation of kids, as we know, that are extraordinarily anxious.
Yeah.
And so what the research seems to show is that programs that deliberately try to reduce anxiety actually make it worse for kids. They're much better off focusing on academics and having them feel strong and able and successful. So that's one. Another is the political evasion, which is to think that the role of schools is to create social justice agents who will rise and awaken to their own oppression of living in a racist society, and then will seek to overturn that world. And the problem with that, of course, is so often that happens at the expense, again, of an academic education. So we're asking children to be social justice warriors while we're neglecting to teach them, and that's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's excellent. The best schools I've ever worked in, a school that I was very proud to lead, a school that schools across the nation that are doing this, like the best schools I've ever worked at, have a relentless, laser-like focus, right, Dr. Worster? You like that laser-like, relentless focus on academic learning.
Mm-hmm.
It's it.
And I would say broadly defined, music and art and theater and
whatever that is,
literature.
whatever that academic
It
is.
cannot be too narrow. It's not just like ELA and math standards,
Yeah.
God forbid. It's a broad spectrum, but deeply academic education.
And when kids see themselves as scholars, right? And they
Yes.
see when they see themselves and they have their own self-fulfilling prophecy that they can learn anything that's in front of them, and they've had enough of those dopamine hits, right? They don't feel like failures every single day, right? And I'll say this too, the students that have either been identified with a special education need or students that have come from immense poverty, there's this pity of low expectations. And
Totally.
I can't remember which civil rights leader said, there's soft bigotry and low expectations.
Soft bigotry of low expectations. And it actually shows up in research. There was this wonderful report by the Centrist Education Reform Group, TNTP, formerly the New Teachers Project, which looked at, it's called the opportunity gap. And it looked at exactly what you're saying, Nathaniel, which is that they found that students spent roughly 6 months a year in classes where instruction was well below what they were capable of. And that's something we really need to fix. It's this chronic underestimation of, I can say that, of what students can really do.
Yeah.
Stephen, it kind of reminds me, and Nathaniel, you talked about this, when teachers believe students can succeed, they tend to. I enjoyed reading Robert Pondisio, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, his latest article from, I think it was the National Review, about we need to stop with the doom and gloom, because when teachers have that mindset about how terrible the world is and how terrible all their students' environment is, that also gets transmitted to our students as well. So not that we need to be unrealistic optimists, but if we're only focusing on the doom and gloom, that's what we're going to produce in our students. And
I just want to endorse that. It was a terrific piece. I recommend it to everyone. And that's right. I mean, I think it's quite cruel to tell the kids the relentless message that the world is rigged against them, that it's hopeless, and also that larger things are hopeless. We are doomed by climate change, of course, which is absolutely real and a very serious problem, but that together all these messages conspire to create an atmosphere of hopelessness. And that's not a good thing.
I wonder if that's almost by design, because
other generations have faced equally daunting problems and they have prevailed, and that should be the message. Also, we want to tell our kids, especially the most marginalized students, that they can play a role in tackling these problems of their generation. They're not going to be at the sidelines just being buffeted by them, but they're going to contribute as scientists, as politicians, as writers to making this change, and that change is possible. So it's a message of optimism and of agency, not of pessimism.
I got to tell you, a fearful generation is a generation that can be easily led. And I worry about that. I
could not agree more. It's a very precarious position to put them in, particularly in a changing geopolitical environment the world over, to have a new generation that will soon take responsibility, that has been raised in schools that cultivate fragility and anxiety. It's a very, very worrisome concern.
Yeah.
Stephen, you mentioned opportunity if you didn't know, there is also an opportunity makers, which is out by TNTP as well, kind of the sequel to that, where they looked at schools that are doing really well, Nathaniel, to your point earlier, and they said a lot of those schools were coherent and consistent and fostered a positive sense of belonging for every student to feel like they were part of that community. Anyway, it's a great report. It's very interesting.
Wonderful.
Good follow-up.
And I
I,
think the one thing we haven't talked a lot about is student discipline. And
yeah.
there's a legitimate critique of a lot of charters that they veer towards overly punitive discipline.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I'm really excited about is that at our work at Ascend, we put in place responsive classroom, which I'm sure you guys are
Yep.
quite familiar with.
I mean, yes,
Really
yes.
with large, pardon?
Yes, yes.
Okay. It was really mainly used in suburban or more affluent settings, but we used it in a deeply urban poverty setting, and it worked like a charm. It was all about building community, building relationships, building a sense of belonging. And our discipline problems virtually vanished once
Hmm.
we made that change.
I think clarity is an important part of classroom management as well. And you need teachers who can very clearly see what their classroom should run by, transmit that message to students where they can understand this is our procedures, this is how our classroom should be run. No one benefits from a lack of clarity from classroom management standpoint.
100%. And the teacher needs to have the confidence to assert
Yes.
that culture.
Yep.
And that can be very hard for novice teachers, of course.
It can be.
Yeah.
So what's going on promising? What do you see coming out of education in general that is a positive trend?
Well, I think that I don't know if you saw recent pieces talking about, I guess the term is the Southern surge. So, we
Mhm.
Northerners have an ugly habit of being, I'm afraid, dismissive or even contemptuous of of the South, which is viewed as still to this day as backwards and so on. Well, we're in for a real surprise because a lot of Southern states that have doubled down on phonics instruction in early grades, science of reading,
Science of learning.
science of learning, a knowledge-based
Yep.
curriculum, deliberately building knowledge, word and world knowledge from the earliest grades, are beginning to see some really impressive gains and successes. So I think that's one of the most exciting things. I remember doing direct instruction with a capital D, capital I back in the day when it was, completely frowned on by everybody. But you know what? Every one of our kindergartners was decoding by the end of. I emphasize decoding. That's not the same thing as reading, right? But they were decoding. That's a good start.
Mhm.
Quite reliably. So we have these exciting tools, and I think people are finally realizing, let's just go and get them. And so I think that's a big development. I'm extremely worried, on the other hand, about AI in classrooms. That's obviously 2 or 3 episodes of your show and not 2 minutes. But that's a real concern for me. And to me, it really points to the fact that we need to keep our eye on a liberal arts education for all kids so that we remember what makes us deeply human and what sets us apart from a machine. And I think it's further evidence that the tilt, not so recently, towards purely math and science and technology, STEM instruction, with the view that kids could become coders and make a lot of money, for example, is misguided. I mean, that's going to be one of the first things replaced by machines. So I would say, let's give all of our students, a really deep exposure to the humanities, to literature, to writing, and the ability to, as a liberal arts education does, to hear diverse opinions, to
Sure.
wrestle with different
Yes.
ideas, and to
Yep.
recognize the humanity of those with whom we disagree.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. That's fascinating.
Is Edie Hirsch winning?
I think Edie Hirsch is winning, and I will say I have tremendous admiration for him. I think some of his writings are the most powerful things I've read, and I've always been, I don't know why I'm so thick-headed about this. I've always been really puzzled by the opposition to Hirsch. I mean, I get that we don't want to say, like, these are the 10 books you have to read. That's
Yeah.
silly. But the idea that there is a a common set of knowledge, ideas that power our culture and enable you and I to have this conversation, and that all children should be exposed to that communal knowledge, I think is just quite obvious.
Mhm.
Yep.
And there's some effort to identify what those are, what that knowledge is, not at the level of saying you have to read this book and not that book,
Yep.
is actually a very valuable exercise. We can't read an op-ed in the paper where it talks about some scandal that ends in the word gate and know what the hell they're talking about unless we know that Watergate happened. So
Right.
knowledge is an accretion of stuff. And if that accretion isn't happening fast, kids are going to be left behind. So I think Hirsch was right.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we throw that term equity around all over the place, but then we can't have an equitable foundation,
Right.
for kids to be even to start that. Um, it's funny. We would have loved to have had E.D. Hirsch on this show. We may have to. I think there's a way through AI. We
He's
could probably do that,
he's
right?
still alive. He's
He's
alive,
still
pal.
alive. We
I
got to
think
get
so.
him. We can't get him
I
on.
tried. I tried.
Yeah, no, he's very much still alive, but he's not young.
He's not young, but
I think he's in his 90s, 92,
we-
93.
He's in his
I'd love
90s.
to.
Yes, I think he's in his mid 90s.
we'll keep trying. If not, we'll have to AI generate it. We could probably do something.
Or just do an episode where you read from a few of these passages. I mean, because I think they're really stirring.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and the thing about it is like I think the controversy comes from, well, who has the say in what we need to be able to do
That's
that?
right, and that's
and I
the
get it.
concern, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I get that, and I get that.
And
But let's just
I
have the
totally get
conversation.
that too. But I think, just on this point, I think that Don Hirsch was really misunderstood as saying that it's just dead white male writings that we
Right.
should be reading. He's never said that at all. He was always the one to say that this core is endlessly expanding. It's always changing. It's always being enhanced by new contributions from young writers and thinkers, from people of color from all over the world. And we want our students to be cosmopolitan. And I've read a lot of that. So I think that's an unfair critique of him that
Yeah,
we often hear.
I agree.
Stephen, where can people find you?
Sorry?
Where can people find you?
You can find me at the Pioneer Institute, where I'm a senior fellow, and you can find my book on Amazon. And would love people to write and share their reactions and comments, and keep the conversation going.
And
I
Stephen,
love
I
it.
appreciate what you said earlier about how it really does take a diversity of thinking for all of us to move forward. I think that's an important theme today.
We're in such deeply divided times, and we need to come together, and we need to listen more and to understand that in fact we agree far more than we might think. And
Yep.
I'm
Yeah.
hopeful that we will make the pivot toward that.
Yeah, education should be the ultimate bipartisan issue, and a educated democracy is a democracy that can sustain and endure anything. And if anything, like whether it's good, bad, whatever, at least we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Let's just keep it in let's just keep it in the narrative. No matter your school, be in all school, right? Be in all school. And principals out there, if you have any if mentalities, be brave, be bold, and please address that stuff. Because at the end of the day, if you wouldn't put your own child in that classroom, don't put anybody's child in that classroom. That's my soapbox, Steve. I got to throw that in a little
No,
bit.
can't be said enough.
Love it, Stephen. Thank you so much for honoring us with your perspective and your insights and your legacy to make a difference. And we really appreciate that. And thank you exceedingly for joining the Community Connection.
Listen, it's totally my honor to be with you guys today. It's super refreshing. It's so different from the other conversations I've had about the book. So
That's
thank
right.
you so much. You're doing such important work to have this show.
Awesome.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you.